You blushing? That's sad. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Excellent. Did you enjoy your little outings at Shackleton? I have to say, share with you, I've been here several times. What we had today was a treat. Shackleton, Elephant Island is usually just not possible in the Zodiac. So being on a Zodiac was a privilege. And being at Elephant Island, which Shackleton, what better than to have the one and only one, Scott Kelly, who's a Shackleton expert. Yeah. So, all right, Scott. Are you ready? All right. Welcome, Scott, to the stage, everyone.
So, I have to say, never in a million years did I think I would be giving a talk on Ernest Shackleton, who is one of my personal heroes, right off of Elephant Island. I mean, this is really pretty incredible. I do want to set the expectations here. A couple of things. One is I am not a historian. I am not an expert on Ernest Shackleton, but I am a big fan. And I've never given this talk before. This is the first time. So, but what I want to tell you today is about Ernest Shackleton. And for me, he was an extraordinary human being. And the reason is because he was not defined by his successes. I mean, he was completely defined by his failures. At NASA, we have this saying, failure isn't an option. It absolutely is an option. I mean, we are humans, and we often fail, and that's how we learn. Had he completed this journey, I don't think many people would know who he was. You probably would have never heard of him. So that's who I want to talk about today. And for me, it was mentioned earlier, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I actually named my book Endurance. My memoir that was called Endurance, A Year in Space, A Lifetime of Discovery, for a few reasons. One is my mission was the longest of any American at the time, been surpassed since. Also, because my own personal story, I've always felt like it was one of endurance and perseverance, because I wasn't like the typical guy that, was successful at everything growing up and got straight A's and went on to an Ivy League school or a military, one of the U.S. military academies. So my own personal story is one of just, always, pressing ahead, failing, learning from it, which I really, so that's why I can relate to Shackleton and why he is one of my heroes. And I do have to say, sometimes people think, because I named my book Endurance, I was somehow stealing his idea. But the reality of it is you cannot copyright a title. So I could have called it War and Peace if I wanted to. Yeah. So I've had the privilege of flying in space 4 times. My first mission was STS-103 to Hubble Space Telescope in 1999. Hubble. Everyone likes Hubble. You guys know those pictures are not in color, right? That's a black and white camera. Hate to break it to you, but it's the truth. There's a person at the Space Telescope Science Institute that colorizes them based on data, but still, that visual camera is a black and white camera. I flew a second time as a commander of a spaceship called Endeavour to the International Space Station, and then I did 2 long-duration missions. One was about 6 months, and the other one was more than twice, a little short of 6 months, and the other one is nearly twice as long. And that first 6-month flight, I didn't know what to expect. No idea. Generally on the space station, you're unless something happens that's really drastic, you generally feel like you're fairly safe. The environment, even though there's some level of discomfort to living there, it is generally it's not that bad. But it always has the potential to become quickly the environment could deteriorate, the life support systems, maybe resupply issues. So I brought a book with me on both of my long duration flights that I thought, hey, if I ever was in a situation where I was feeling a little sorry for myself, depressed, down, I would maybe just open up a few of those pages and read it and feel a whole lot better about my situation. And the book was Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Adventure. Brought it on both of my long duration missions, and I left it up on the International Space Station for people to read it and have it there in the future. And the book, it's interesting. The first thing it starts with is the very first sentence is the words that follow are true, which I think it was important for them to make clear right from the beginning, because when you read the story, you're like, how is this possible? I mean, it seems like fiction, what these guys were able to accomplish. So Shackleton, he was born in Ireland, but he was English, lived there for a number of years, and this is in the early part of the last century. So he was born in the 1800s, grew up into the 1900s. At 16, he was not a very good student, which I can absolutely relate to. I felt exactly the same way, and he went to sea. And believe it or not, and this is something that's not very well known, of all the astronauts, I think, as far as I know, American astronauts that have flown in space, the only two mariners that were trained as merchant mariners are me and my brother Mark. Because I went to a school called New York Maritime College in the Bronx, New York. And I was able to get a third mate's license in the U.S. Merchant Marine there that I still have, actually. I've never used it or sailed on it. And my brother was likewise, but did it from a better school called the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And I still have this license today. So at 16, Shackleton goes to sea for the first time, and he quickly rises through the ranks and becomes a master mariner at a very, very young age. In 1901, as a young man, he joined Robert Scott's expedition to try to reach the South Pole. Never made it. Failed. They got about 530 miles from the pole and had to turn around. 1907, this is him as a 16-year-old young man, and a picture of him later in life. But in 1907, he led his own expedition. For some reason, I was trying to say expedition, and got much closer, 97 miles. But he was running out of food, and he decided that if he would have continued, they would have perished and would have never made it back. So he made I don't know if it was a tough choice, easy choice, but to turn around. So he had failed on that too, but he made it the furthest south. And he also was able to climb the highest peak in Antarctica, the first person to do that. Unfortunately, a little while later, a guy named Roald Amundsen, in December 1999, finally made it to the South Pole, the first person to do that. And I think Scott followed, the explorer Scott followed quickly behind him a month later. So Shackleton's dream of reaching the South Pole was over. He was beaten. But he came up with this new plan. He was very good at that. If his current plan wasn't working, he just came up with a new plan. And that's I feel like I've done that often in my life. Can I get a handheld? Because this thing isn't really working for me. It's falling apart.
Test one.
Yeah. So the trans-Antarctic expedition was, let me take this thing off. So the goal of his new mission was to land on the northern part of the continent, cross the South Pole, and continue on. So cross the whole continent from one side to the other with the help of another ship called Aurora that was going to put a bunch of supplies out on the other side of the pole, so they would have enough food and equipment to make it back. He was really a master at, besides being an incredible leader, probably one of the greatest leaders of all times, he was also a master marketer, as evidenced by this, and a fundraiser. And with this ad, they were able to get thousands of people that wanted to go on this journey, including a few women too, which at the time, was very, very, very uncommon. But I love this poster. And I always like reading it. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful. Now, as an astronaut, to me, I wouldn't have flown in space at all if my safe return was doubtful. I like to say I would go to Mars, but I wouldn't do the one-way trip. And I know there are people out there that would do that, but that is not for me. Having lived on the space station for nearly a year, I want to live, I want to have a couch and a bed. But, so in 1914, he purchases a ship called Endurance. It actually had a different name, and he changed the name to Endurance. But his ship, unfortunately, wasn't designed. It was designed as an icebreaker, but it was designed as an Arctic icebreaker that was designed for different kinds of ice, not pack ice. I think that was one of his big mistakes right from the beginning. But it was a very, very sturdily built ship. It had it was 144 feet long, and it was made out of this. It was made out of this wood called greenheart that comes from South America. In places like the keel, it was 2 feet thick, the hardest wood at the time. The bow of the ship was reinforced with steel. And in August of 1914, I believe August 1st, 1914, Shackleton and his crew at this time, there was 26 people depart from London for Buenos Aires, and he didn't even go with them at first. He caught up to the ship later in Buenos Aires because he was still busy with his fundraising. And the captain of the ship was a guy named Frank Worsley, who was not only the ship's captain. Now, Shackleton was also trained as a captain of a ship, and he was a master mariner. But Worsley was so critical because of his ability as a navigator. And as you know, at that time, navigation, required, you needed three things. You needed a compass, you needed a sextant, and you needed a clock. And so Frank was critical. The second in command was a guy named Frank Wild. He was the second in command of the expedition. So they leave Buenos Aires without Shackleton, and the ship arrives, I don't know how many months later. Some of you may know some of this stuff better than I did, but he chose his crew, not necessarily because of their technical skills. He chose them in many cases because of their temperament, because of the type of people they were, because of not their skills, but their personalities, their ability to work together as a team. And he thought it was so critical to have a crew with camaraderie that would get along. In some cases, he thought that was even more important than certain technical abilities. He valued people that had been to Antarctica before, people that had suffered the hardship. As you can see, I can't imagine living here, and were able to do it, with a smile on their face. He would even ask people these odd questions like, after talking about their technical abilities, when he was interviewing for his crew, he would ask some of the people random questions like, can you sing? And I find some of this very similar, actually, to the astronaut selection. When I interviewed my first time in 1995, and years later, I was on the astronaut selection board. And when you're on the selection board, you really see how this kind of thing works, right? When they bring you in, they feel like everyone has the skills and the qualifications to do the job. And then we choose people really not based on that. We really choose people that we like, that we would want to be either on a ship with, whether it's a spaceship, a space station. And I think Shackleton was very much the same way. So they get to Buenos Aires, and one of the crew members, I forget who it was, but helped this guy, this young man right here. This young man named Pierce Blackborough. One of the crew members helped him sneak on the ship as a stowaway, and when they got far enough away, I think this was after South Georgia Island, but they got from South Georgia Island, they had this stowaway, and once they got so far from land that they thought, well, they're not going to turn back, he reveals himself as the stowaway. And the first thing Shackleton said was, well, here's the deal. You know, if we run out of food, we're eating you first. But then they quickly were able to assimilate him into the crew, and he was treated just like everyone else. On August, like I said, on August 1st, they depart London right at the beginning of World War I. And they were actually, Shackleton offered to turn the ship around, but they were told to proceed because he wanted to help the war effort, but he was told to continue going. So now they're in South Georgia Island, and they're trying to decide, hey, when are we going to depart? And all the whaling captains said, there's too much ice, you should just give up and do this the next summer. But he pressed ahead, which was one of his big mistakes. So they leave South Georgia in December 1914. Spirits were really, really high. And they get to the Weddell Sea December 5th. I'm sorry, January of 1915. They arrive in the Weddell Sea. And so their plan was, so here's South Georgia. And that was I did not prepare well for this. Thought I had a laser pointer on this thing. But anyway, so their plan was, South Georgia, Weddell Sea, make land down here, and then, like I said, traverse the continent and eventually meet up with the ship called Aurora, which is interesting because you don't really hear much about that part, right? And I think the reason you don't hear much about the crew of Aurora, they had a similar issue where they got stuck in the ice and were stuck in the ice for 10 months. Their ship was carried in the ice well away from shore, and they actually lost 3 of their crew members on the continent. Three people had died. Perhaps if they had not had those casualties, maybe the captain of that ship and those crew members would have had the same kind of fame as Shackleton. It's interesting, and I think everyone knows this, that at the end of this experience, they had not lost one person, which is incredible to imagine how that is possible, that on a cruise, on a ship, and in that kind of situation, that nobody died. Oftentimes when I go on a cruise like this, somebody dies. So hopefully it won't happen this time, right? So they get stuck in the ice. And when they get stuck in the ice, they're like just a few miles from the shore. They're like one more day of sailing, and they would have made it. But the ice closed in, and eventually the Endurance gets stuck. 1 day from the continent, it was trapped, and then it was starting to drifting north. Shackleton was hopeful that they were going to be able to drift closer to land, but that didn't really work out to their favor. In the beginning, you know, their morale was pretty good. The crew was trying to break up the ice at certain times and break the ship free. But eventually, they realized this is not going to happen, and they're going to have to ride the Endurance in this pack ice until the following summer, through the entire winter. So now their mission basically changed from, you know, a mission of exploration and discovery to a mission of survival, which was great. I think one of Shackleton's traits was that if his plan wasn't working, he would come up with another plan. So that's what he did. So at this point, it's all about survival, and they're going to have to, you know, survive through the Arctic winter. Eventually, the ship, they're living on the ship for many, many months, and then it starts, as the pack ice closes in, it starts to break the ship apart. For them. At some point, they get to the point where it's too dangerous on the ship, so they have to leave the ship and make a camp on the ice called Ocean Camp. And over the course of this of their survival here, they wound up on 2 different camps on the ice over the course of the year, basically nearly a year that they were floating on the ice. On November 21st now, 1915. Remember, they got stuck in the ice in January of 1915, which was the summertime, and now it's wintertime. Actually, coming into the spring in November, November 21st, 1915, their ship sinks to the bottom. And Shackleton says, "She's gone, boys. It's the end of the ship," as the pack ice crushed it. Immediately followed with, "The ship is gone, but we are alive. We must do our best to reach safety." So they are drifting on this ice pack, thinking eventually this ice pack is gonna break up, and they're gonna be able to put their lifeboats. They had 3 lifeboats that they got off the ship. The most famous one, named James Caird, which was a lifeboat that was named after one of the donors to fund this whole expedition. You know, his leadership, you know, during this time when they were on the ice was really, really extraordinary. You know, some of Shackleton's traits, I think I learned a lot from reading his book, not Endurance, but also the book South, which I highly recommend, but it's also very, very technical. There's a lot of technical details about the amount of supplies they had to take, things like that. But he was really, really a remarkable man, because as the leader, he balanced his authority with camaraderie. So even though he was in charge of these guys, he was also one of them. I mean, if anyone was going to suffer any hardship, it would be him before the rest of the crew. And he particularly, you know, took great care in people that, the people that were suffering. You know, if people were having challenges, those were the people that he would bring into his tent. Those are the people he would get close to just make sure that they were okay. In April 1916 now, and remember, they left in South Georgia in 1914, got stuck in the ice January of 1915, and now it's 1916, over a year after getting stuck, the ice starts to break apart, finally, which is, he felt, a very critical time and was very dangerous, because he felt like the ice could just break apart underneath them, and then they'd be back in the water in their lifeboats trying to navigate through these ice flows, which could, you know, just like they crushed Endurance, they could easily have crushed Shackleton's lifeboats. So they decide, hey, we're going to have to get to the open sea. So they spend 5 days dragging all their supplies. their lifeboats over these giant like glaciers and things called hummocks, which were house-size pieces of ice. It took them 5 days with very, very little rest to finally get to the open ocean. Their plan was to get to an island where they can then survive until the next summer and somehow be rescued. And they wound up here on Elephant Island. Crew of 28 people, 3 lifeboats. They actually had a bunch of dogs that they were already gone. Unfortunately, you know, they were their sled dogs. They were also their companions, and eventually, unfortunately, the dogs became their food as they ran out of food. So it took them 7 days to get from where they departed the Weddell Sea to this place, Elephant Island. And it was 7 days basically of rowing and bailing. And when they got here, right, as you can probably tell, it was somewhat bittersweet. They actually didn't first land here at Elephant Island. They landed further, I guess, east, up the coast. But it wasn't a place they could survive. I don't even know how they survived here. I mean, just looking at that, imagine living there in with 3 lifeboats. I think they turned over the lifeboats and basically used them as shelter, and survived by hunting seals and penguins. After a month on the island, so now it's March of 20. Sorry, I'm getting my dates wrong. Anyway. So they're on the island. They've been on Elephant Island from April to May now. And Shackleton makes the decision, hey, if we're going to survive this, we need to rescue ourselves. We need to go get help. So they take one of their lifeboats, this James Caird, outfit it for this incredible, arduous 17 days at sea. So they have to build up the sides of the ship. They put a deck on it to where they can get underneath. And he and I believe 5 other crew members get in the James Caird with the plan of sailing 800 miles to South Georgia Island to seek rescue. Now, had they missed the island, all of them probably would have died. You know, not just the guys on the James Caird trying to get to South Georgia, but also the crew members that are back here on Elephant Island. These are pictures from the photographer. Was really an incredible person. This guy, Frank Worsley, I think, took these amazing pictures really in the early days of photography. And he also had a video camera as well. And these are, I think this is cool because these are little, they call them dogloos, where the dogs lived. And these dogs actually came from Canada. They thought they were going to get a bunch of huskies, but they got these like rando, like different kinds of dogs that didn't get along with each other. Some of them were mean, especially this guy. Looks pretty mean. The James Caird was one of the most remarkable stories of survival. The ability to take a lifeboat 800 miles in 50-foot swells for 17 days, only navigating with the sun and the stars and a sextant, a compass, and a watch. It's really remarkable that they were able to make it. You know, had they missed the island, like I said, they would have absolutely died. They actually wound up landing on the, here's some more dog pictures. They had some puppies were born. I'm going to catch up to where I'm talking here. They're really incredible photographs of the ship Endurance breaking apart on the ice. And this is one of their ocean camps on the sea ice. And this is Shackleton over here. Pictures of them, you know, traversing the pack ice and these hummocks, pulling the lifeboats and all their gear to get to the open ocean. Can't even imagine how challenging this was. This is where we are right now, I believe, or pretty close to it. And they're I bet you that glacier is actually right behind here, right behind the screen. Pretty, pretty amazing. But yeah, these are the examples of the lifeboats that they used for shelter right over here on Elephant Island. And this is launching the James Caird for the 800-mile journey. Took them 17 days. One of the crew members on board this ship actually recreated that journey in a similar lifeboat with similar navigation equipment, although they had a rudimentary GPS that he was telling me his family made him take, or they wouldn't let him go. This is Shackleton leaving Elephant Island for South Georgia Island. Yeah, yeah, we're right there, right? There's that glacier. Pretty amazing. So they arrive on South Georgia Island, but they arrive on the wrong side. They wanted to get to the other side, but they couldn't. You know, the winds and the sails of this boat, and I think it was also the size of the keel on the boat just didn't allow them to tack around the island. So now they're on South Georgia with the potential to get rescued, but they have to cross these mountains in really harsh conditions with with very little gear, no climbing gear, nothing that they really could use for that type of environment. And I want to talk a little bit about the similarities to spaceflight, because I do think there are a lot of similarities. Spaceflight is, it's exploration, it's risky. There's all kinds of personal risk, physical risk, in some cases even like these guys, psychological risk when you're put in that kind of extreme environment. But this is the Russian Soyuz as on my last flight. Soyuz is a traditional rocket, where the crew sits on the top, unlike the space shuttle where you're sitting on the side. It's a lot smaller than the space shuttle. It uses liquid kerosene and liquid oxygen for fuel. And there's so much different about, flying on this thing and flying on the space shuttle. When you fly on the space shuttle and you get out to the launch pad, giant vehicle, seems like it's almost alive. The place is almost abandoned of people with the exception of you and your crew because, it's a rocket, it could blow up. You don't want to kill a lot of people. In Russia, completely different situation. You get to this rocket, fully fueled, and there's like 100 people at the base of the rocket. And some of them are smoking cigarettes. I kid you not. This is a video of me launching March of 2015 with Misha Kornienko and a guy named Gennady Padalka and docking to the International Space Station. Gennady's a great guy. I'm still friends with him. I haven't spoke to Misha since right after the invasion of Ukraine, unfortunately. And that's Misha and I floating into the International Space Station. He and I were going to be on there for nearly a year. Turned out to be nearly a year. We launched in March, landed in the following March. 13 other people would come and go over the course of that year. But every day it was going to be me and Misha on the International Space Station. Yeah, one time we had, generally we had as many as 9 people on board, but there was a 6-week period where it was just me and the 2 cosmonauts, which I kind of liked, actually, because when you're the only U.S. astronaut on the International Space Station, you have the whole side half of the space station to yourself. You can float around naked if you want. Never did, but maybe I did. I don't know. But yeah, this is a space station. It's an amazing, amazing facility. It's like it's just so incredibly fascinating. But like Shackleton, you got to bring all your stuff with you. You're not gonna, or at least most of your stuff. I mean, we get resupplied sometimes. Sometimes those rockets blow up, and we lost a couple of them while we were up there. There were actually moments where we were running out of food. Never got hungry, but we were kind of running low on supplies, and it's something we absolutely had to consider and think about. This is a view inside the space station. This is the U.S. segment, bright, very open, complex scientific laboratory, and now we are going into the Russian segment of the International Space Station, which is a little smaller, a little darker. Retrospect, a little more sinister. So let me stop here for a second. You know, one of the things Shackleton did for his crew members during this time is, you know, you got to keep the camaraderie high. You know, they learned to, you know, play bridge. They played soccer. They played with the dogs. They had dog sled races. And we'd kind of do, you know, similar stuff on the International Space Station at times. This has audio, by the way. This has audio, by the way. My brother says to me one day in the summer of March of 2015, he goes, "I'm sending you a gorilla suit." I'm like, "Wait, what? Gorilla suit?" I'm like, "Why are you sending me a gorilla suit?" It's like, "There's never been a gorilla in space before." I'm like, whatever. First gorilla suit blows up on the SpaceX rocket. Talked to my brother a day later. Says, "I'm sending you another gorilla suit." About I don't know, probably during the end of the mission, he's like, "Hey, you bring the gorilla suit out yet?" And I was like, "No." But finally for him, I put it on. I chased Tim Peake around the space station. And my wife, Amiko, here had this music, Yakety Yak, put on it. And then my brother, Mark, proceeds to send it to NBC News without even asking me or telling me about it. So the next morning, I get an email from my boss, chief of the astronaut office. You can't call the space station. You can call on the radio, but you can't call on the phone. You can only call down, which is great. No one can call you. Girls will hang up on people and blame it on the satellite coverage. But anyway, that next morning after this video was on NBC News, I get this email from my boss that just says, "Call me." I'm like, oh, God, I know what that's about. So I call this guy, Chris Cassidy, former Navy SEAL, and the first thing he says to me is, "I saw that gorilla suit video." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "What else is going on? How you doing? You need anything?" You know, he was told by his boss to call and talk to me about that, so he did. And I think it's something that Shackleton would have done, right? Like, what's the point? I'm on the space station. What are they going to, you know, why are they going to do that? But so we're up on board for nearly a year. Eventually, it's time to come home. You get back in the Soyuz rocket. You know, Soyuz comes home similar to the space shuttle, right? But it's so small and it gets hot inside. It's kind of like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, but while you're on fire. And as soon as you realize you're not going to die, it's the most fun you've ever had in your entire life. I mean, the parachute opens and you're just thrown around like crazy. Really, you know, if I hated being in space for a year, I would have done it all over again just for those last 20 minutes, even though I didn't hate it. But then you drift gently down to Earth, and then you crash into it, kind of like a car crash. Actually, in this particular landing, that was a normal landing, the commander had to have his spleen removed after. Then the rescue forces show up and you know, they open the hatch and fresh air rushes inside, and it really seemed like the first time I had ever breathed fresh air in my entire life. So anyway, back to Shackleton. So he arrives in this whaling station, and then it takes him 4 different trips over several months because he still has to deal with the ice to rescue the remainder of his crew with, I forget the name of this ship here. The what? Okay. If you say so. You know, there was this, so eventually his entire crew is rescued on August 30th, 1916, which is like a year and a half after they got stuck in the ice. And it's really amazing, you know, that no one in this situation had died. Yeah, yeah, August 30th, 1911. Yeah, even though it doesn't look dark there, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? I'll check it out later. But so there's this other Antarctic explorer named Sir Raymond Priestley that has it's one of the best my favorite quotes I think of all time, and it says for scientific discovery give me Scott, meaning the explorer Scott, for speed and efficiency of travel, Amundsen, but when disaster strikes and all hope is gone, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. And you know, it always, whenever I read that, for some reason, it, you know, I wouldn't say tear up, but it's a little emotional for me because he was such an important inspiration, you know, throughout my life from the first time I read his book many, many years ago. But what made him so remarkable? Like I said, he nurtured teamwork. He had empathy. He always prioritized his crew above himself. With this kind of people-centered leadership, he was a servant-type leader that I always tried to emulate that in my experiences as the commander of a spaceship, or the few times I had done that on the International Space Station. Eventually, he wound up, there's a picture of the crew, I believe. Yeah. Hard to imagine. What's that? Yeah, yeah. This was pictures of him leaving Elephant Island. So in March of 2022, a ship left South Africa to try to find the Endurance. It was in 3,000 meters of water. It was 4 miles from where they last, Frank Worsley had his last position, where they were able to find Endurance. And it was really just incredibly preserved. This is one of the first views of the back of the ship. Here's the back stern, excuse me. The helm. This is a flare gun that the Frank Worsley, as the ship sank, he shot it into the air to in honor of the ship that they had lived on for such a long time that, you know, was critical to their survival. And then he just threw as they left the ship, he just threw it down on the deck, and it's still sitting there. You know, as well as, yeah, this is I believe that's a composite. No, this is the composite picture of 25,000 photos of Endurance and how it looks on the bottom of the Weddell Sea right now. And Frank Hurley was the expedition photographer, and I'll tell you what, you know, had it not been for him being there, this story probably would not have been told as well as it was in the very early days of photography. So with that, I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask me any questions about Shackleton, although there might be people that know more about him than I do, but also questions about space, about the parallels in exploration of space and sea, which is interesting, you know, space to sea, sea to space. Perfect fit for me, right? As a merchant mariner astronaut.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we got 15 minutes for questions. Antoine?
A comment and a question. First of all, the comment. I mean, thank you very much for this presentation. Just amazing. The captain of the Yelcho was Pardo. We saw his bust. He was a Chilean. Mm-hmm. And something I'd like to just add to this conversation, I'm very proud that I share President Sanfuentes' family, mm-hmm. because President Sanfuentes warmly greeted Shackleton and his crew in Santiago, Chile on their way out. That mm-hmm. was September 1916. Yeah. So your timing is right. My question for you is, I shared the Zodiac with you today as we sort of rounded. What were you thinking? I mean, you finally connected with this area. You actually traveled in the same sort of journey that Shackleton and the rescue. What were you thinking?
Yeah, you know, it was emotional. I used to look out the windows of the space station, and the space station doesn't fly this far south at only south latitude. It goes between 51.6 north and 51.6 degrees south latitude. So you don't fly over this area, but you can sometimes see it off in the distance. And I used to try to, with binoculars, see Elephant Island or I gotta look for those photos and get some just pictures of it on the horizon. Always wanted to come here. Never thought I would. Certainly never thought I would be, right here talking about Shackleton right off of Elephant Island. Really, really special for me, and being such a hero of mine. Yes, sir. Certainly, it was much shorter. Also, an extraordinary tale of survival. Interesting, Gene Kranz never said failure is not an option, actually. Even though that quote is attributed to him, he loves it. I think it made him more wealthier than he had been prior to that. But where that phrase came from was when they were making the movie Apollo 13, and Gene and Ron Howard, who was the producer, were talking. Gene said, we laid all the options out on the table, and failure was not one of them. Failure is always an option. So I failed early, I failed often, I will fail again. But yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels in that between the crew fighting for their survival. The big difference, though, is in Shackleton's case, they didn't have any help. Whereas, a crew on a spacecraft, at least in the vicinity of Earth, will have some support from the ground, some help, engineering expertise, stuff like that. But the reality of it is all they can do is give you advice, right? They can't really come and save you. Yes, sir.
So I know that, you sort of highlighted two things about Shackleton here. One was his leadership, and the other is his ability to sort of, in the face of this extraordinary terror, for lack of a better word, like, keep going. Mm-hmm. In your experiences, I know, or at least as far as I know, you haven't had anything quite so extreme happen, but have you had moments in your space career that felt truly terrifying to you, where you were like, sort of weren't sure how you were going to get out of it?
Yeah. So there's one. It was summer of in 2015. It was just me and the two cosmonauts on the space station. We get a call from the ground, and they say, we're privatizing the space-to-ground channel. And when they do, sometimes if you're having like a conference with your doctor or your family or something, it's coming. But when that comes out of the blue, it's somewhat alarming, because it's going to basically be bad news. The last time I had heard that was January 8th, 2011, when Capcom says, hey, we're privatizing the space-to-ground channel. The chief of the astronaut office is going to come on and talk to you, meaning me, not the other folks. And Peggy Whitson, who was the chief, she says, I don't know how I'm going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you your sister-in-law was shot in the head. And 6 other people killed in Tucson, Arizona. My sister-in-law, Gabby, she was a congresswoman at the time, my brother's wife. And at some point, the media was reporting that she had been killed, actually. So, I was halfway through a 6-month mission. The second time I heard that was my next flight, summer of 2015, privatizing the space-to-ground channel. And I'm like, like somebody's hurt, car accident, sick or something. But then I hear Russian satellite. And I'm like, okay, that's good. None of my family's on a Russian satellite as far as I know. But they say a Russian satellite's coming at us at 17,500 miles an hour. It's going to get within a half a mile. We don't know how close. In the opposite direction, so that's 35,000 miles an hour closure, which is 25 times faster than a rifle bullet. And they didn't see it in time or understand the ballistics fast enough to move the space station out of the way. So we had to go into the Russian Soyuz, partially close the hatch, and three of us are sitting there just looking at our clocks, looking at our watches, and we know the time of the closest point of approach. And it's just like counting down, and I noticed Misha. I'm in the right seat, Padalka's in the middle, and Misha's on the left, and Gennady Padalka, the Soyuz commander, says, "It will really suck if this satellite hits us." and then Misha says, "Duh, will suck." And I noticed Misha looking out the window. I said, "Misha, you're not going to see anything. This thing's going 35,000 miles an hour relative to us, and it's dark outside." And I'm looking out the window, and we're listening, and we're like tensing up, thinking that maybe this is going to help. And then it dawned on me, if that thing would have hit us, we would have never have known. I mean, 35,000 miles an hour is probably much faster than your neurological system that would register anything had we got hit. It actually wound up getting, I think it was about 0.7 miles from us, but we never saw anything. But that was probably one of the moments when, I was probably most concerned. I had other issues. My STS-118 flight, where I was the commander of the space shuttle, we had a piece of foam fall off and put a fairly good-sized hole in the bottom. And this was after Columbia, so there was a lot of concern of, would we have a burn-through of the fuselage of the space shuttle. Turned out worked out okay. Yes, sir.
Why not 365 days?
Uh-huh.
And did you get to be in space with your brother?
Yeah, interesting. So the reason we didn't do a full year, it just had to do with the traffic pattern of vehicles and the Russian schedule. We wanted to do a year. I could have stayed longer had there been a reason for it. Would have loved to have done that, but we didn't. And I've never been in space with my brother. On my first long duration flight, we were supposed to be in space together, but his flight got delayed, and I wound up coming home before he ever got there. But yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So this is a very rudimentary question. So for Shackleton, if you pull up a map and you look at where South Georgia is, and you look at where we are and he was, and then you look at where we came from, why did they go back to South Georgia? What was the reason?
It was prevailing winds, sea state. I mean, I think most of the winds in sea state here go from west to east, and it was probably the closest point of land that could use the weather, prevailing weather, versus going somewhere else. Yeah, but I'm not positive. But that's what I suspect. Yeah. All right. Anyone? Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about what they ate and if there was ever time periods where they were pretty scarce on food and how they dealt with that?
Yeah. So they brought a lot of food with them. There was this, I forget how you pronounce it, permicin. It was like a blubber and protein, or fat and protein combination. They had a lot of tobacco. They had alcohol. But as soon as they got stuck, they put all that stuff away and decided, that was going to be their emergency food. And they lived on the seals and, whatever birds and other things that they could kill. Actually, before their first winter, when they were wintering over, they stored and were able to get 5,000 pounds of meat that then they ate. And he figured that wouldn't last the entire winter, but it would probably last about half of it. And then they used their own stores and stuff that they took. But I think, probably traditional types of diet of that time, I would imagine. They often dealt with scurvy because I don't think they even knew what that was at that point. Yes, sir.
Does it get lonely in space, particularly after so many months?
I'm sorry, what?
Does it get lonely in space?
You mean like Rocket Man? Lonely out in space? You miss people and you miss the weather. I wouldn't say I ever felt lonely because you do have the ability to connect with people on the ground, video, email, the phone. You know, there are people in the U.S. military that have much harder than we do on the space station with regards to, you know, family connectivity. No, I would never say I was lonely. I certainly missed things. But I think other people have been. I've had crew members tell me that when they were on the space station, they were very lonely. But I never really experienced that. Yes.
So can you talk about some of the DNA changes? Is like after that many days, one of the kids wanted to ask you, did your DNA change so much? Are you still twin brothers?
Yeah.
But but can you talk a little bit about some of the, I guess, health things that were discovered?
Yeah, there was a study between my brother and I called the twin study. Now, some of you are scientists. You very well understand that a scientific experiment with one sample is not statistically significant. You need many, many more. But this was called a longitudinal study. So it compared us to ourselves, me to me, him to him, and other people. Most of it was genetic based. 7% of my DNA changed, and they think as a result of the environment. Now, our DNA is always changing all the time anyway, but compared to my brother over that period of time, they were confident they could correlate that with the environment. My telomeres got better. Telomeres are ends of our chromosomes. It's an indication of our physical age. As we get older, they get shorter and more frayed, and mine got better while I was in space compared to Mark's. It made me, from a telomere perspective, yeah, like teleyears, there's a company that'll do that, yeah, made me maybe younger. Initially, NASA thought it was due to the very controlled diet and all the exercise we do. We have to exercise a lot on the International Space Station for bone and muscle loss. I exercise 6 days a week, and still I lost 25% of my heart mass on the space station. Came back over time, but yeah, you definitely get some muscle deterioration. Yeah. I don't think they've ever characterized it as damage, but they said, you know, change in DNA, change in gene expression. And our genes are like DNA, RNA, proteins, and it's you know, it's what controls our physiology. So are those changes good or bad? I don't know. In the case of the telomeres, they got better. And like I was saying, NASA thought it was like the diet and the exercise. But about 6 months after I got back, we learned that the Japanese had a telomeres experiment on the space station the same time I was up there on these little worms. And their telomeres got better too. And I never once saw them working out on the treadmill. So there was more than this. And now they think it was the radiation actually would excite and exercise our telomeres. You know, hopefully it's not doing something worse somewhere else. But you know, that was what the cause was. But the biggest difference between me spending a year in space and my brother Mark on the ground, and you know, a lot of people think he was an astronaut then too, but he wasn't. He had retired. He was going to do it for free, but this job for free, but NASA didn't allow him. They don't allow people to just work for free. So for the time I was in space, he was paid minimum wage. He was actually the lowest paid government employee getting minimum wage. But the biggest difference after I came back after that mission is now I am both smarter and more handsome than my brother Mark. Smarter as evidenced by the fact that he is now a U.S. Senator. So.
Thank you very much, Scott. A big round of applause, everyone.
Thank you.
It was great. Great. We're a little bit late in the program today, but usually right before the briefing, the expedition briefing and recap, we will have for the rest of the voyage, Bill telling us his impression of the day. So for the first, here are Bill's daily impression.
Well, what a burden a burden. So, how's your sister-in-law now, Scott? What? Is she well? Speech problems, right? From what I remember. Wow. Wow. The miracle is that she's alive, isn't it? Yeah. Incredible moment. I too read a little bit about Shackleton and became enamored. Um, he was such a leader, and as an individual, he failed at so many things in his life. He felt that he wasn't good at anything except exploration, which is extraordinary because that's a sense of curiosity. What's lies beyond the horizon, and the courage to follow that, and then the courage to not only take the trip but to finance the trip, do everything that he needed to do to make the trip possible. Shackleton, and then I read description of Elephant Island and kind of thought about it, in your imagination. So today apparently is miraculous in that the weather is usually bad. You can't go out I just heard myself a Canadian out. You can't go out in a Zodiac ordinarily. Only once before has this happened. So a kind of miracle happened for us on this ship that we were able to get into the Zodiac and have this incredible moment. For me, this is like illuminating the beginning of Earth. I mean, this is what Earth looked like to begin with, and to be able to see this moment. But the thing about Elephant Island is that 20 people. I'm sure your Zodiac leader showed you where they started and where they pitched their camp. They had two lifeboats. They turned them over and lived. At times, they were able to light a candle made with the fat of the animals they were consuming. So they had a little smoky flame sometimes in the darkness of the boat. And they lived in darkness. It was black. It was midnight here for months at a time. The incredible endurance of those people is almost inhuman. So when I was pulling on my second sock over the first sock, and I thought, it can't be worth this struggle to get dressed and to find the things that you packed, but you don't know where the gloves are and it's all I don't think I'm going to go. I mean, it's not worth it. Well, maybe it is, Amanda. And Liz helped me get on the thing, and I'm in the pants, and can't find the gloves. And my grandson handed me one of his pair of gloves, and then getting into the thing and the zipping and the and I'm looking at, you got to walk down on and that bouncing boat, and I'm going to fall in, and no, I'm not going to go. Well, all right, I'll go. And I saw God. It was a religious experience. It was a spiritual experience for me, seeing this splendor of nature and the animals all around looking at us, and we're looking at them, and the penguins. There was a wonderful penguin dissertation this morning. I don't know whether you attended it or not, but the birds and three different types of penguins that are around here. And I again marveled at the ability to life forms transfer themselves to accommodate their environment. So here are all these strange animals who've adjusted to the extreme cold, and again, a miracle of life. That was my impression.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bill. And now your expedition leader, Frederick, will give you the briefing for tomorrow.